Good Friday, everyone. Welcome to the Volquest.com podcast, and welcome to football. Hard to believe that fall camp is indeed here. Jeremy Pruitt and the coordinators meeting the media on Thursday. Tennessee going to the practice field this afternoon, and lots of things going on, lots of things to get to football-wise. Let's jump first let's start offensively, guys. Let's start with the story time with Jim Chaney. Jesse, you mentioned after he visited with the media on Thursday, hey, it'd be great if he got to speak every week. Rob, Austin, we got a chance to hear him speak every week when he was here the first time. He's always entertaining. But from a football standpoint, what's your takeaway from what Jim Chaney said offensively? Rob, I'll start with you.
He was really complimentary of Jarrett. Talked, about his maturity, about his intelligence, his grasp of the game. I don't think that was just coach speak. I think Jim's been pleased with what he saw there, and also, I think, Jim didn't come out and just, question them blatantly, but I think he expressed some, reading between the lines, I think he expressed some reservations about the offensive line, which is not surprising. He talked a lot about the need to be more physical, thought that they did some good things in spring practice. And again, he wasn't being critical, but I think like everybody else, he just doesn't know. And I think that's a big question.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, Jesse, because the thought process on Jim Chaney is his first go around here with Lane Kiffin in 2009, I guess it was, in that year, that they mask on the offensive line. They mask all these shortcomings on the offensive line, and he turns around and when he's here with Derek Dooley, they're playing all these freshmen and they're masking the shortcomings. He wasn't talking about masking on the offensive line. Do you think that was coach speak now, or do you think that maybe the way defenses are played in this league, it is harder to mask offensive lines than it once was?
Perhaps. He did explicitly note, Rob and I were standing there, he explicitly noted that the year they played three freshmen, he was like, I don't want to do that again. That's too many. And we're talking about Tennessee potentially starting to bookend, offensive tackles as freshmen, but he also was explicitly asked, can you mask? And he said, I don't believe that. He noted that, when he was at Purdue, they threw the ball all the time, and people thought that was a way, especially with Drew Brees and the quick passing game, was a way to kind of, cover for an offensive line that perhaps wasn't deemed as quality. And he said that was not the case. That was just kind of the best way to attack defenses. This is going to be one of the storylines at camp. Rob had it in, the big 6 questions that need answering by the end of the month. How does this offensive line shake out? Trey's going to be a big wild card. Jeremy offered really no new details there.
Wow.
Yeah, really nothing. He didn't. He offered absolutely zero there. So what happens? That's a wild card. Is Wanye ready to ascend and be the left tackle? If not, do they go Jameer Johnson there? And how does that trickle down across? We've talked about Kennedy. Can he stay healthy? How ready is Cal? It's going to be a fascinating group. There's a chance that the 5 guys they started at the end of the 2018 season in the final game against Vandy are not in the starting lineup week 1.
All 5.
All 5. There's a real chance. But there's also a chance that several of those guys, the Niehauses and the Marcus Tatums, end up actually being in the mix.
How much of this, Austin, do you think is that Tennessee's got some legitimate competition there, or they've just got so many unknowns and you don't really have anything and you're just trying to find 5? Seriously.
I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm like, I honestly could think both ways. I do think they have legitimate competition, but I also think that they don't know who their 5 are, because they don't know what they're having the freshmen yet, because they haven't really been put out there and put pads on yet. I agree with Jesse. I thought it was notable that Jeremy Pruitt said on Thursday, he was quick to note, the freshmen, but there are guys that have been here for 3 years that are far bigger than they were a year ago. I think he said he was excited about the offensive line.
Yeah, he did.
That was one of the most interesting things, because he did not particularly say much for his other 20 minutes. So that one line I thought was one of the more interesting things Jeremy said.
I've said for a few months now that I thought the offensive line was going to be much better just because of quality depth. Are they going to go out and just be total, butt kickers? No, I don't think that's the case. But a year ago, I thought when you looked at the offensive line, you maybe felt good about a couple of guys, if they're out there. I think you could say that, there's a lot more than that this year, that you felt like if they rolled out there. Don't you remember when Trey Smith went out against West Virginia and they brought Nathan Niehaus in? What were you thinking? Because I was thinking, well, this is going to be crazy. And then he held his own. And so I think, those guys have just gotten progressively better. For all the talk about Will Friend, and recruiting and all that stuff, I think Will actually is a good teacher of football and pretty good offensive line coach. So I think these, to answer your question in a roundabout way, I do think they're searching for the 5, but I do think that there's legitimate competition.
But Jeremy could also just be projecting confidence there because that was one of his other themes. I thought
it was
on
confidence.
Thursday was talking about him believing in the team needing to believe in the staff, and kind of
that goes a long way sometimes with young men.
It does. I'm just saying. I think there's maybe some trickle down effect from that. I mean, it's going to be an unknown, right, Rob?
Yeah, but I mean, if you just look at the face of it, if Brandon Kennedy's back and healthy, if Trey plays, then you're talking like Ryan Johnson and Jameer the Johnson brothers, Ryan and Jameer. I mean, they both suddenly become backups, and they started every game they were healthy last year. I mean, that's kind of quality depth. I mean, you're looking at Marcus Tatum, who's played a lot of football here. If either he wins the job or you've got 2 really good freshmen. I mean, I just think that
I'm interested.
I'm not going to say they'll be great by any means, but I do think they're going to be a lot better.
Well, Jerome Carvin played a ton of center in the spring. I'm really interested to see if is Brandon Kennedy. I mean, he's a former
unknown.
He's an unknown to me. I mean, he could end up being really, really good.
Yeah, he started one career game.
Correct. Yeah, he could end up being really, really good, and you're to the point where you get late in the year and you're like, man, maybe he can get a 6th year, and help us again next year. Or, it wouldn't surprise me at all if a guy like Jerome Carvin, who, has shown some flashes at center, doesn't at some point, make a play there. I mean, Brandon Kennedy's got to be good, or it all starts there and kind of works its way out.
And Karan Galbert has been the biggest, most physically imposing guy up there forever, and just hasn't. Has never played any football.
Right, never been able to stay healthy to do that. So obviously, you got to stay healthy there. But I think we all agree that while they don't know who their 5 are, they're not close to finding their 5. The pool of finding 5 is better than it's been.
Oh yeah.
in a while. But I thought it was interesting and something you'll have more on. Cheney talking about whether or not you find your 5 and you ride with those 5, or you get in a rotation, or kind of how you manage the whole continuity, because we'll get into that discussion at some point in time in fall camp, whether it's 4 days in, Jesse, 10 days in, 17 days in. At some point in time, there's going to be a discussion about settling in under 5 for continuity.
Yeah, and I mean, full transparency, I'm on the rec. I've said this many times on this podcast that I think that they personally need to, after 2 weeks or so, figure out who they think those best guys are, maybe 3 weeks, whatever, and then those last 10 practices go that direction. I think continuity is important. A year ago, they did all the mix and matching because they were cross-training and all that, and it took them a while to settle. So I asked Cheney about that very subject today, and he kind of laughed and said, a defensive coach thinks you can move a guard to tackle the day before the game. An offensive coach thinks you need to find your starting 5 day 2 of training camp. He said there's going to be a balance there, but he openly admitted. He looked at me and said, that's a good question. I don't know how we need to have continuity. That is extremely important for this group because it is potentially going to be quite young. But what's the balance there? How do you balance competition? How do you balance going ahead and basically finding that 5 if it's not the right 5? It's easily one of the most fascinating storylines at camp.
Yeah, and I think one of the other storylines out of Jim Cheney, Rob, is, and this has been the case since he's been here, but you saw it again when he visited with the media on Thursday. He just exudes confidence to his personality. I mean, you just walk away from him, they're going to be all right on offense. Are they going to be great? No, but that guy's running the show. He's in complete control. He's not worried about it. Nobody else should be worried about the thing.
They'll be competent.
Yeah.
No matter what.
In previous years, and that's not a knock on previous guys, but you kind of went, how's this going to be with Larry Scott? How's this going to be with Tyson Helton and these types of things? With Jim Cheney, it's going to be all right. I mean that's kind of the vibe.
Night and day difference. And again, I'm going to like you. No knock on Larry Scott or Tyson Helton because they've not been calling plays for 20 years. And you would expect that from a guy you're paying him $1.5 million to. You wanted to exude a little confidence.
Right.
I would think, but I think it's a case of you get what you pay for. I mean, Jim Cheney is a guy. I couldn't agree with you more. They're going to be okay on it. I mean, they may not be great, but it's not going to be a comedy of errors like we've seen him. And he's going to find what they can do well, and
Well, you only go up. They've been in the 100s the last couple of years.
yeah, I mean, worst rushing offense in the SEC last year. I mean, under 4 yards a carry. I want to say
3.3,
3.7. I mean, 3.3 in conference play.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would bet you the house gets better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's if not, then they're going to all beat their head in the wall till it gets to that point. I mean, because that'll be the only thing that they work on. Will be 2 running plays so that they can have a better yards per carry.
Split beer works like Novocaine. Just takes it out.
I thought one of the funniest things that he said today. I mean, and I think this, he's got a reputation for adapting, what he does to what his players can do. And somebody asked him, like, Jim, I think you've done everything except run the option. He's like, nope, I did that too at Fullerton State and got fired. So, I mean, but I think that's, I don't think there's, he's real confident, but I don't think there's a lot of ego there. I mean, he's not saying this is what I do, this is what we're going to do.
It's really funny because there is no, quote, Jim Chaney system. Like, it's not like, he has a good reputation.
He has a philosophy, I'm sure.
Right, and a philosophy, but nobody says, well, that's a Chaney system. Or that's Chaney's system. It's just kind of this amoeba of doing whatever. Whereas on the flip side, defensively, there is a system, and the talk from the defensive coaches, and I'll get back to T. Martin and receivers in a minute, but to transition into the defensive coaches, the talk was about year 2 and how much more competent everybody is in understanding.
Speaking the language.
Jeremy Pruitt's simple to understand defense in year 2, which no coach.
Full air quotes. Air horn for the air quotes.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to tell everybody you're doing the air quotes.
Yeah, there you go. Sorry, air quotes. But I mean, I think that's one of the funny things. It's not a knock on Pruitt, but he acts like, because he knows it so well, it's so simple to understand all the concepts. But Derek Hansley talked about the biggest difference he sees from his defense from spring to now is just football IQ in terms of understanding what to do, which we'll see. But obviously, when you look at this defense through the years in this conference and wherever it's been run, it does take a significant jump in year 2 from year 1. And I think a lot of that is just understanding all the concepts that it is and how complicated it is.
Yeah, and one would think that if it's translating in the meeting room, then it should translate much quicker on the practice field. Now, this will be put to the test quite quickly, and we'll find out. We'll get to see it firsthand on Sunday with a full practice, but these next couple days, Jeremy's going to speak tonight again after the first practice. If come Tuesday he's lamenting that the retention's not there and that kind of stuff, some of this stuff may be hogwash, but it seems like the players were saying a similar thing, both Batuli and Darrell Taylor at SEC Media Days, and now the coaches are kind of echoing those same sentiments.
Chris Rumpf Jesse's favorite assistant coach, the loquacious Chris Rumpf, had a great quote about it today. Like what you're talking about, the familiarity. He's like, I've lived in my house, going into the second year now. I can turn the lights out and not worry about stubbing my toe. I know where things are at, and I think he was talking about just the defensive players feeling so much more comfortable. And I think one thing that's underrated is, you've got some seniors now that can tell the freshmen and sophomores what to do, whereas last year it was just that's not the case. And I think that's an underrated aspect of being in the same system for 2 years in a row. You've got some peer leadership. It doesn't have to all come from the coaches.
Well, and Kevin Sherr talked about that. He said, last year we had the lead because nobody, everybody on the roster, we knew them for 6 months, basically 8 months when we got ready to go play. And, they were all just trying to survive themselves individually. So it wasn't like they were stepping up, helping somebody else along the way. Whereas now, a guy like Daniel Batuli is paired up with a freshman, Austin, to try to teach him along the way. And you got, inside linebackers, whether it's Will Ignatius, Shannon Reed, whatever, they're paired up with other freshmen to help teach them along the way. So he's got, as he said, multiple coaches coaching linebacker now as opposed to just him a year ago.
Well, Jeremy Pruitt even talked about, Chris Rumpf talked about it with Jeremy Pruitt, the differences in year 2 with understanding relationships, and that kind of goes along with all those coaches, knowing who you can kind of lean on, coach a certain way, and you're right. I just think the analogy that Rumpf uses, it's a good one, honestly, just because I do think there's, last year a lot of times you're overthinking things, and now some of these guys feel really comfortable, and they're comfortable enough as being upperclassmen to hold other players accountable. They've all given JG a lot of credit in the offseason. It was Rumpf that called Darrell Taylor the face of the defense. Now those two guys specifically have to be guys that really kind of hold people accountable and really showcase the leadership you're talking about.
Now, I will say the irony of all of this, though, is how many newcomers this defense is going to be counting on.
Well, no. We're talking about,
Who have
on the defensive line, who have no snaps. They've been in the system for a year with the exception of the two JUCO players.
But I even mean, like, we got a lot of talk about Roman Harrison was like the popular guy with both Rumpf and Ansley as a guy that could be this designated pass rusher. Who do they find opposite, Darrell Taylor? Who's going to play? I think, we'll get into it, but with Balin Buchanan's status being very much in the air, who plays nickel, I think is going to be very interesting. Pruitt specifically mentioned Jalen McCullough. That's another freshman. We know that the
He mentioned everybody but Kenneth George.
True.
Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
He mentioned like 7 guys.
Yeah, and then basically said some others, which had to have been Kenneth George, have been really good this summer.
Right.
But is that because Kenneth George still has the ongoing?
Yeah, just based off the way Jeremy acted, and I know he didn't just totally say he will not play. It doesn't feel like Balin Buchanan's kind of set on,
I think we're looking at a potential medical redshirt there. I mean, he didn't play at all in the spring, and now they're going to hold him out for the first 3 weeks. Yeah, I mean and again, I mean, Rob had it in the piece. We've talked about it a bunch. That star position is so important for this defense, and they can mix and match. But if Warrior comes down, that means you're probably playing another freshman or a Theo Jackson at safety. So there's a lot of different, and those guys, I think, circling this back to defensive continuity and understanding the defense, the hope is that the Alante Taylors and the Bryce Thompson and those guys can make even a bigger leap in year 2 because now they're not having to think as much. They can just play. They know what it is. Jeremy even said it, a cover 2 versus a cover 3 versus where the strong safety is supposed to be.
Well, but I do think the challenge for when you look at the secondary, there's depth, there's some competition, there's all that. They got to find the nickel guy pretty quickly.
Oh, that's a huge position.
I mean, you've got to figure out what you're going to do there pretty fast.
And again, you can cross train all you want, but you better figure that guy's going to play a heck of a lot of snaps.
Yeah, it's like Jeremy said today. I mean, we teach concepts.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to have a guy there.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeremy knows that better than we do. But I mean
you're going to be a nickel 80%
I mean, it's just the way the game is played now. I mean,
yeah.
there are guys making NFL careers out of the ability to play slot defensive back now. I mean, it's
Coleman just got paid $40 million.
Yeah.
Incredible
To play that position.
Yeah, to play that position.
That's the only position he's playing.
Yeah.
In the NFL. So
and who would have thought that when he was here?
not me.
Willie Martinez, he was the only one who defended him. He got mad at everybody because he had to keep defending him because he said nobody understood how many things Justin Coleman erased in the back end, even though he didn't make a lot of plays. And it took him a couple of years in the NFL to, he wasn't active on the roster every week and all those things. But to Justin's credit, he's found his way to the field there. And
is he still the highest paid nickel in the league?
He just got the new deal.
He just got the new deal.
So he's the highest paid nickel, yeah. I didn't know if anybody got a new deal.
No, I don't think anybody got a new deal after that. But that competition is going to be interesting, and it's going to be fascinating to see what they look like in the back end and how that can help the front end. Can they play as much man as they want to on the outside? Or does that change if you have to slide Bryce Thompson inside to play, the star position? What do you do there? It's going to be interesting.
It is, and
And we'll know more about that on Sunday, because that is something that you get exposed to
for sure
with no pads, because you're going to see that.
For a full practice, yeah. And what's interesting, we had the depth charts and all that, kind of the early projections. Tennessee has a lot of guys that can play safety. They have several guys, I think, they can play this nickel spot. They are, if you want to say they're thin at an area, they don't have a ton of true corners, which is why they're going after so many in this 2019 class, or 2020 class, excuse me. So where does a guy like Warren Burrell fit in? Tyus Fields got a shout out today. So that's again one of the other with the offensive line. I think they're going to play like 6 or 7 guys on the D line. So with the star position and the O line are probably the two biggest position battles I'm most curious about. Starting tonight.
All right, then you talk about back to the wide receivers for a minute.
Play them all.
You got a lot of veterans there. Sounds like
we're back to the Zakazani rotation.
Sounds like they're instead of playing 3 or 4 guys, they're going to play a bunch.
They are. They're going to play a lot. But he did caveat that with there will be certain things that only certain guys will be doing. Like they're going to rotate a lot during the game. But you can if it gets crunch time, you're going to have your money guys out there. But the point is like if they're on a roll offensively and they've scored 3 straight offensive possessions and they're not going to just keep rolling Juwan out there if he's tired, they're going to put another guy in. I mean, they're going to continue to rotate, keep guys fresh. Kind of the what did he say, we're equating it to basketball, just kind of just
platoon
rotating
system.
5 in, 5 out, that kind of thing.
Calipari.
Yeah.
I thought, he was the guys that I was over there listening to him. The guys that he seemed obviously high on were Callaway, compared him to Juju Smith-Schuster, and
Palmer and Murphy got a lot of
Palmer
shout-outs.
and Murphy, which and I was going to. Palmer's no surprise. That was coming out of the spring, but I thought the Jordan Murphy, shout out, because he wasn't asked about Jordan specifically. He threw that one out on his own, and I think that's a guy personally, for me at least, that I've always thought had some ability, some untapped potential. He looks like a guy that's long, can run, has good hands, and he's just never really made much of an impact.
Well, he had that really nice open practice a year ago, generated some buzz, and then just kind of faded by the wayside there. I think everybody and all of us, and any fan, anybody out there listening, is always careful about who's getting all the love. Before anybody gets out on the practice field and you see anything doing. I thought it was interesting. Seems like Means getting more love as a freshman than Keaton is at this
Keaton
point.
got a little
right?
water thrown there. I also thought, even Juwan, T really praised Juwan's maturity and the fact that he thought, honestly, had been more bought in this summer than he was in the spring, that maybe he was still that he still kind of thought that Juwan wanted to be like the number one guy, and that it's going to be more, egalitarian. That they're gonna move people around, and that Juwan has really bought in this summer. But then when he was asked about his health, he did say, I'm going to leave the specifics up to Jeremy. But it sounds like they're going to be very careful with how many snaps and reps he takes, I think, the first couple weeks of camp.
Well, I think you have to.
Yeah, which gives other guys opportunities.
Austin, don't you have to put, and not like you do Trey Smith and whatever the plan is with that, but you got to put Juwan Jennings on a snap count. A practice snap count. I'm not saying the guy gets to walk around in street clothes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and show up and play on Saturday, but you got to be cognizant of him and not beat him down and not wear him out throughout fall camp, because look, he is what he is.
You know what
you got, right?
Yeah, you know how he competes.
Right. So I don't think he's got to go out there and prove himself that way. So I think you have to be very cognizant of that and very careful with that.
If you're the staff, what you hope happens if some of these young guys start making enough plays to where Juwan goes, nah, I can do this, and then and starts pushing himself a little bit, because it's easy as a veteran. It's the old Orlando Pace method. Show up late to training camp and then go play the season. It's easy to sit back and go, this is training camp. I don't want to get out there, but you need to push yourself a little bit, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if Jordan Murphy and some of these other guys can come along, then that would certainly create some competition there and create the rotation that T. Martin is talking about. This is just a snippet. There's so much going on with this football team, as you would expect with the start of any fall camp.
I was going to say, you asked about, one of the only direct answers that Pruitt gave on Thursday was about your question about Gibbs and Solomon, and it seems pretty noteworthy that he didn't say at SEC Media Days, but now has said Gibbs is going to redshirt. He's not going to win an appeal, but we're still waiting on Aubrey.
Yeah,
and the intimation seemed.
It almost feels like we'll throw Gibbs to the wolves.
We're hoping.
It's kind of like when you self-impose a violation, hoping you won't get the hammer.
Yeah, we're hoping to get.
Don't come to our campus. Whatever you do.
We're hoping to get that green light for Aubrey.
Well, I will say this: long before D'Angelo Gibbs, his appeal was even filed, we noted this on the day he transferred to Tennessee. We noted this and talked about this. He was going to be a long shot to win his appeal.
Yeah, and his argument was much thinner
right.
than Aubrey's.
Tennessee believed from the get-go with the idea, we're going to take D'Angelo Gibbs, redshirting him. I don't think Tennessee ever thought that they were going to really win that appeal unless there was something there that they didn't really know about at the time. They took him because of what he could do long-term for them, not necessarily to play immediately. Now, they would have liked to have had him immediately, but I don't think they ever believed when they took that transfer that he was going to be able to play and win his appeal. So we'll see. The big question on Solomon, no timetable. He said it could happen this afternoon, could happen 2 weeks from now, could happen game week.
Well, and that's the thing. Going up there in the media and bellyaching about it probably ain't going to help your cause anyway. So you might as well just kind of take that, it is what it is. Whenever it comes, it comes. Aubrey, because Jeremy's the first one to say that, the way they platoon and stuff, everybody's getting the same adequate amount of reps. Walk-ons, starters, whatever. So I'm sure that, Aubrey's going to go out there and be practicing just like everyone else would.
Yeah, certainly. But again, who knows? It could be game week before you get a decision on that. That's just the way
They
the
need him, though,
NCAA works.
With Garland, you don't want to be two bodies down.
Strange on the answer on Garland. I don't think
Yeah.
Garland's going to be back.
But he left the door open.
That was kind of
Smart on his part, though. I
Yeah.
mean, you just see it happen all the time when guys
Well,
here's go back.
here's what you wonder about Garland. You wonder if Garland can't find a place this late because he's made this decision to go. Camps are opening up. Who's going to take him? Can he get all this stuff in order and get transferred somewhere and be somewhere in August because he's waited
wasn't
so
someone
late?
that had a ton of options coming out
Right.
to begin with.
So I think that's part of the reason why you leave the door open there. And I'm not sure Tennessee's recruiting him hard to keep him back, to get him back. But as you mentioned, you don't want to be down two bodies if you can avoid being down two bodies. Okay, quickly to recruiting as we get ready to wrap up the podcast here. Tennessee with news on Thursday night, getting James Robinson, a guy that camped at Tennessee and then came back the next week, Austin, for an official visit. This one felt like Tennessee in June, that it could happen at any point in time. Delayed it a month or so, but this fits the physicality nature that Jim Chaney was talking about on Thursday and what he's got to have out of offensive linemen.
Yeah, and there were multiple staffs in the SEC that liked James Robinson. They just either were full at that position or just were in a different spot in recruiting. So in my mind, James Robinson's a really good get for this staff. He's mean, he's nasty. For an interior lineman, he's exactly what you want. He's super strong, and I think a pretty good athlete, Jesse, for his size.
And he had a great commitment video, I thought.
He did. It was phenomenally shot.
he's a basketball player. He can do. He's got nimble feet and heavy hands.
He does.
Those are two things you want in an offensive lineman.
Yeah, the feet. We watched him at camp this summer, and that was one of the biggest things I really liked about him, and I know Jesse did too, was, I ain't gonna call him twinkle toes, but his feet are really good for a lineman. Yeah. So when you look at Spraggins, James Robinson, and of course Cooper, that's a great trio on the inside. Can they find anybody? Can they, Dumerville seems like he's headed towards maybe Florida at this point. But can you get back in there? Can you find a tackle in this class? Because it certainly seems like Chris Morris is likely headed to Texas A&M. So can you find a tackle in this class to go with those three interior guys? Because I think Robinson, Spraggins, and Cooper it's a pretty good trio.
And the pickings are thin.
Yeah, it's not a great tackle class.
And
most of those guys are off the board.
The pickings are thin. We're talking about some of the ASA guys, Antoine Reed, Traditor. Those are guys that have been to campus twice.
And those are more project guys, in my opinion.
They are, but they're again. You look at who Tennessee's offered and who they've continued to recruit, and those are some of the few guys that are still available.
Yeah, and tackle bodies are hard. A, they're hard to come by to begin with, and B, like you say, they're off the board early. So we'll see.
And they're going to play the long game with Dumerville. Dumerville may not decide because I think there was some inclination that if there's a spot open at Oklahoma, he'd want to go there. But I don't think that's going to transpire. So if he does wait all the way until one of the All-American games, which was the initial plan, then Tennessee still has a good shot, I think, at getting him back on campus for an official visit. But I do think they face an uphill battle against Florida there.
Yeah, I agree with you where that was at. Savell Smalls spent a couple, 3 days on campus after visiting Florida State for a couple, 3 days. Rob, it's kind of interesting to hear a guy publicly state, I'm going to watch and see what Tennessee and Florida State do because those two programs are in rebuilds, which is it's just
smart.
Smart. Crazy to think these two programs are deep in a rebuild right now. But finally, somebody, we've talked about it on the podcast, we've talked about it in the chat and everywhere else. Tennessee's going to have to prove something on the field. You can't just keep selling hopes and dreams to some guys and to Savell Smalls because he's got so many options.
Yeah.
He's not buying a hope and a dream. He's got to see some results.
I don't blame him at all. You can see where kids would say it. They come here, they see the stadium, they see the facilities, fan support's obvious. You walk around town, power tees everywhere. It's a big deal, especially for a kid coming from the West Coast. I don't think you see that, in college towns over there. But it's got everything except a winning program right now. So I can totally get a kid saying that. I was impressed by it.
Yeah, very impressive kid.
If you go back to when Miko Hardman.
You mentioned this in the podcast maybe on Monday when you talked about or last week. It's a great comparison because he was very similar in the mindset.
You go back to Miko Hardman, even Derrick Henry. You go back to Derrick Henry in 2012. Derrick Henry visited here like 7 times.
Liked everything
Jay
about
Graham
it.
could not have done more with Derrick Henry. Sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Kids want to win.
Kids want to win. And even though everybody kept saying, well, Nick's going to move you to linebacker, and he just believed what Coach Saban told him. He went there and he was a baller. They won the Heisman. So I mean, you at some point you have to show progress. And I know that's something we've been saying a lot around here the last decade. But until you start to do that, you're not going to beat out major marquee programs for these top end guys. Now, with that said, Savell is a guy who's looking at Florida State as well, and they're, as you said, in a similar position. Florida's in a much better position. They've not been to the playoff or anything, but I mean, to beat those type of teams, you're going to have to, win. I thought it was interesting. He said 8 or 9. To me that was interesting that he gave a win total. It almost was like something he had been told, like, hey, it's not realistic for us to win 11, but if we go from 5 to 8 or.
Well, and that's why I don't get why fans are, all up in arms about recruiting struggling. I mean, you're recruiting against Georgia and Alabama, and you've won 2 SEC games in 2 years. I mean, no kidding, recruiting struggling. There's no way to sugarcoat that.
No, it's hard. And again, very polished kid, very clear, very defined in his plan and what he's going to do. He's going to wait until February because he wants to see how a season plays out at these places. He's going to come back and see Tennessee. I give Brian Niedermeyer a ton of credit for getting the guy here for an unofficial visit and then they did a good enough job to get him back here for an official visit, unless Tennessee falls off the map. Now, if Tennessee's 2-5, he may not make that official visit.
Think about all these kids, Smalls, Darnell Washington, everybody. They were 5 years old when Tennessee played in an SEC championship game.
And you don't remember.
Seriously.
What do you remember when you were 5 years old about a football team? The color of their uniform. You didn't know if they had any success or not.
They were in kindergarten the last time Tennessee was in Atlanta playing for an SEC title.
That's the hard part. That's where you've got to show.
And Peyton Manning's retired now.
Yeah, exactly. Great point.
It's not like he's even in the NFL.
They're like all they do, he makes funny commercials with Brad Paisley.
Right now, who's Tennessee's most?
It's Alvin Kamara.
Alvin, you're exactly right. And because Barry's not on a team right now.
And Alvin played 2 years here.
Yeah.
Well, and
was totally underutilized.
Right. That's fair to say. The most noted thing about Alvin Kamara is he was not utilized at Tennessee well enough.
He backed up San Francisco's 3rd-round draft pick wide receiver.
Who's getting in fights with everybody.
They like it. Feisty.
But, I think that is where the recruiting thing, because of the age and everything else, again, when you're this far into a continual rebuild, you get to that point where you've got to show some tangible results. That's why this afternoon on the practice field starts a very important month for Tennessee. What does this team become? Can they stay healthy? Can they find answers that they need to find? And can they find a way to win some close football games? That's why this season is such a critical season. Again, plenty of stuff to talk about with this football team. We have plenty of coverage coming up throughout the day today, all weekend long, as we're in the full camp mode. There'll be photo galleries, video highlights, stories, videos, all those things. Continue with our podcast as well.
Come check out the open practice on Sunday.
Check out the open practice on Sunday. You can come over and watch that, and you can get some autographs. It will be hot.
Jesse will be signing between gate 16 and gate 17.
Gated dog.
That's where you'll see him, down next to the railroad ties underneath the bowels of Neyland Stadium. You can find Jesse Simonton. That's going to do it for this edition of the Volquest.com podcast. Austin's going to bring his sand wedge. Rob will have a coffee cup, and I just hope to be here. We'll talk to you throughout the weekend at Volquest.com, but that's going to do it for this podcast. Have a great Friday, everybody.